Okay, ladies and gentlemen, welcome. Thank you for tuning in. And thank you to our host, Yossi. He's actually commemorating this Shabbos, the yortzeit of his father, Aryeh. So we wish him only Besorot Tovot, and for all of us. So let me say in advance, I may be a little bit, what word shall I use? Spirited, even a bit harsh in discussing this subject. It's a subject that I think we need to talk about, and especially in this time and place. So I will get there. We're going to talk about why was the Bet HaMikdash destroyed, and more importantly, why has it not been rebuilt? I mean, we're at a certain crucial point in history, so I think we need to be thinking about that now that we have sovereignty over most of Israel. I want to say all of it, but we have to consider, as Tisha B'Av comes upon us in just a couple of days, this most central idea of the Beit HaMikdash. I think a lot of people maybe dismiss the Beit HaMikdash. Yes, I was told, I spoke yesterday in Yerushalayim, and some people were saying, well, there was a commentator in the newspaper that said that people are going to only fast, some quote unquote religious people, until 5 p.m. And then they're going to start to say things that are, in praise of Yerushalayim and all the things that have been built in Yerushalayim. You can see, decided to really out of my schedule write something in the Jerusalem Post tomorrow, why this really is a black fast this year. There were some years when people legitimately maybe could say, why are we focusing on the negative, on the past, when we have so rebuilt Yerushalayim? Well, I think this year is a different year than other years, and certainly it's not a time to do away with Tisha B'Av, quite the opposite, but I'll get there. So why was the Beit HaMikdash destroyed? The Chachamim, the rabbis from the Gemara and further on, well, they have a strong opinion. And you know how rabbis are. If one has an opinion, the other one has to have a different opinion. You're not going to be recorded for all time if you just say the same thing as the previous Chacham. So just a few of them to remind you, and taken from different Gemaras. Abaya said Yerushalayim was destroyed because there was too much desecration of the Shabbat. There wasn't too much Chilul Shabbat. Rabbi Avahu counters and said, no, Yerushalayim was destroyed because we didn't focus enough on our tefillot. We didn't say the Shema each morning and each evening with the proper kavanah. More on that later. Rav Hamnuna said that Yerushalayim was destroyed because the education of the school children was neglected. Interesting comment, because we have an ongoing debate about school children here in Israel across the board. Are they being deprived of knowing about their heritage and whether they are observant or not, understanding what it means to be Jewish in a Jewish state? Ula said Yerushalayim was destroyed because people had no shame before one another. Interesting observation. Rav Yitzchak said Yerushalayim was destroyed because the small and the great were made equal. In a sense, there wasn't enough respect either for elders or for those who were, we might say, older in knowledge or other categories. Rav Chanina said Yerushalayim was destroyed because the people there did not rebuke one another. We often think and say it's not proper to tell anybody else that they're doing something wrong. Nevertheless, says Rav Chanina, this is what allowed the situation in Yerushalayim to deteriorate, so that people did not give musar one to the other and actually stand up and say, I think what you're doing is wrong. Rabbi Yehuda said Yerushalayim was destroyed because the people disparaged the Torah scholars living in the holy city. We all are familiar, I think, with the most famous quote about the destruction of both the first and second Bet HaMikdash. It's the Gemara in Yuma that asks the question, why was the first Bet HaMikdash destroyed? And says the Gemara, because three cardinal sins existed in the time of the first Bet HaMikdash: Avodah Zarah, Gilu Arayot, and Shvichat Damim, idolatry of one form or another. Maybe hard to define the Gilu Arayot, but let's say immorality in the larger sense, and then violence. Asks the Gemara, but in the second Beit HaMikdash, when people were very different, when they engaged in Limud Torah and Shmirat HaMitzvot and Gemilut Chasadim, that they studied Torah, they did mitzvot, that they also practiced acts of chesed, kindness, why was this Beit HaMikdash destroyed? And the famous answer, due to sinat chinam, erroneously defined, I suggest, as baseless hatred. Nobody really hates anyone for no reason at all. There may be bad reasons, but I don't really see people just walk up to someone and they've never met before and say, I hate you. But the Gemara adds, this teaches us that the sin of baseless hatred is equivalent to the three severe transgressions that destroyed the first Beit HaMikdash of idol worship, immorality, and bloodshed. But the Gemara goes on to point out and ask the question that sinat chinam was also rampant during the first Beit HaMikdash. Maybe it wasn't as pronounced as in the second, but it did exist in the first as well. So why is this also not a reason for the Beit HaMikdash destruction? And one explanation is that the sinat chinam during the time of the first Beit HaMikdash was primarily expressed by the leaders of the time and not the common people. Something we could probably all think about for a moment. The leaders, sinat chinam. Another explanation, I won't dwell on that. Another explanation is that although there was indeed disunity and hatred in the time of the first Beit HaMikdash, had there been achdut, unity, this first Beit HaMikdash would not have been destroyed, even with those three cardinal sins being present. For as we've seen from other periods of history, even if there were many sins committed, as long as there was still unity between the people, Hashem held back his wrath and we survived. I want to just say a word about sinat chinam, that I think a better explanation is to take the words literally. Sinat chinam, the hatred of one's chen. Chen is the special quality that each person has that makes you different from everyone else. It's a hard word to define, chen, but it means something favorable about you. And if people cannot recognize in everybody else that each person has something special about him or her, that's where we really become problematic and, in a sense, dismiss these people as if they have no worth at all. You can always find something good to say about somebody. There's that famous story about the rabbi who was officiating at a funeral, and the family was not enamored with the deceased, and they told the rabbi in no uncertain terms, we do not want you saying anything good about this person. We knew him and there were no redeeming qualities. And the rabbi thinks to himself, what am I going to do? I don't want to get up there and say something negative. And the people are watching him. He gets up, goes to the podium, looks out at the crowd, and says one sentence. His brother was worse. It's an old rabbinic joke. I want to focus on three other reasons given for the destruction of the Beit HaMikdash. One, it sounds very strange, says the Gemara, the people then did not make a bracha prior to learning the Torah. We know we have a bracha, la'asok b'divrei Torah. Seems like a strange statement, just not making a bracha. It's a Gemara in Baba Metzia. But I think the deeper understanding is, why do we make a bracha in any situation. We do it to focus on what we're doing so we can have greater kavanah, greater intent as we bless Hashem. That's why you have different brachot for different foods and not just one bracha, shakol niyeh bidbaro, because by being specific, you are able to focus and have a greater gratitude to Hashem. But when we make this bracha on learning Torah, we're supposed to be focusing our attention as to what the Torah is all about. It is about love. It is about unity, about making a connection, not only with the one up there, but also with the ones down here next to us. Hashem is willing to be mochel his kavod. He's willing to put aside his honor if we love one another, his creatures. And that's why Rabbi Akiva said that love, v'ahavta l'recha kamocha, to love others as yourself, is indeed the guiding principle, the klal gadol of the Torah. So here we already see a deeper idea that yes, we're learning Torah, but we're not focusing on what the Torah is all about, what the goal or what the message being sent by the Torah is. And that is enough to destroy the Bet HaMikdash. The learning of the Torah doesn't suffice if you don't have the right intent along with it. A second reason given by Chazal, also coming from the Gemara in Bava Metzia, says that they, meaning the judges or the rabbis, the elected leaders of the time, established their rulings on the basis of strict Torah law, and they did not go beyond the letter of the law. They did not go what's called in Hebrew, lifnim mishurat hadin. And the commentators ask on this kind of strange Gemara and say, how can this be a negative quality such that, says the Gemara, for this alone the Bet HaMikdash was destroyed? Because after all, a judge cannot free a litigant. A judge is bound to the law and has to be careful that, we have to have a system of law. Without law, you have chaos. One of the terrible things happening today is that Israel, in many ways, has abdicated the rule of law by taking people who committed the worst possible crimes. Not talking about parking violations or robbing a bank. I'm talking about killing people. And the government has set these people free. We've seen, as a matter of fact, it's such a horrible thing that's being done, I would add, that they are purposely hiding the numbers of the murderous terrorists who have been freed and not telling the public. When you hear those numbers, you'll be shocked to know how many thousands and thousands of these murderers have been freed in total violation of the system of law and order. But the Gemara says and asks, you have to uphold the law. So there's a beautiful answer given that this too is an example of sinat chinam. It's up to the litigants to be willing to find a compromise and each side to go beyond the letter of the law, because the judge always says, to the litigants, are you willing to make some kind of a pshara, some kind of an agreement among yourselves? If not, I'll pass judgment. But first, you try to come to an understanding. That would be best. So the commentators are saying that we were unwilling. We stood our ground. We were unwilling to go lifnim mishurat hadin, above and beyond what was coming to us. Had we been willing to go lifnim mishurat hadin with one another, then Hashem would have done likewise. But since we took a hard line, since we didn't show enough mercy or enough consideration or enough flexibility vis-a-vis our fellow Jew, then Hashem said, okay, I will act in a likewise manner. I will also take a hard, unfeeling, inflexible line. And because we had committed these sins and we deserve for the Bet HaMikdash to be destroyed, Hashem said, I will stand fast on my judgment as well, because you decided to do the same. Had you shown the way, by giving in somewhat and not demanding every ounce of what you thought was coming to you, but rather found a way to compromise, I would have done the same. But now, because you didn't, I won't either. And then there is a third reason given that I want to explore for a moment. You know, the final death blow of Yerushalayim comes not when the Romans destroyed the Bet HaMikdash, but 60 years later, after this second Khurban. Though it had been greatly reduced, there still was a functioning Jewish community in Yerushalayim. And maybe that community could have regenerated. Don't forget, we only had a 70-year exile after the first Bet HaMikdash was destroyed. So maybe we could have come back from that blow of the Romans. Instead, this possibility was snuffed out as a result of the failure of the Bar Kokhba rebellion, which then sealed our fate for 2,000 years. Let's remember that this period is also characterized by the death of the students of Rabbi Akiva. Because Rabbi Akiva was the Torah leader of the generation and at the same time was the ally, the military support, or let us say the very energetic supporter of the military of General Bar Kokhba, it can be assumed, since he held both posts, that his 24,000 students were also a combination of both Torah scholars and army soldiers. But they seemingly did not mesh, because the Gemara tells us they were not noheg kavod echad l'sheni. They did not show respect for one another. Maybe, we don't know, maybe the soldiers looked down on the Talmidei Chachamim because they didn't serve in the army. And maybe the Talmidei Chachamim looked down on the soldiers for not learning enough Torah. Either way, there was disrespect, there was disunity. So I suggest that Hashem looked down at what was going on and said, think about it. The second Bet HaMikdash was destroyed recently for Sinat Chinam, recently 60 years prior. How can you then wage a rebellion to rebuild this Bet HaMikdash if you are still practicing Sinat Chinam and you can't get along with each other and show kavod one to the other? So the rebellion failed. There was no need. There was no impetus to rebuild the Beit HaMikdash if we were going to simply repeat the sin that brought it down in the first place, Sinat Chinam. So the rebellion fails. The final blow is delivered, and we remained without a Beit HaMikdash or a capital city for 2,000 years. Until finally, less than 2,000 years, until both the Hasidim and Chilonim, who were among the very first Chalutzim, the pioneers coming to Israel, they come back and begin to rebuild the formation, the building blocks of the state. On that platform and that basis, working together, Hashem gives his bracha and the state begins to take form already in the 1800s. What we are seeing today, sadly, is an outbreak of Sinat Chinam and disunity that is tearing this country apart. We all see it. It's right there in front of our eyes. And you see it reflected in many ways. The most odious, I think most of us would agree, how can a so-called religious leader pray that Yuli Edelstein, arguably the most moral, dignified member of the ruling coalition, how can they pray that he should have been kept in prison by the Soviet rulers and never let out of jail, and say this in public? How can another so-called rabbinic leader, one of the most respected in his community, rule today or yesterday that yeshiva students are better off living out of Israel rather than serve in the army, and B, that they can be Machal Shabbos if necessary in order to run away? How can somebody have the audacity to make such a statement? And what do you think Hashem is thinking when he hears that? Even if someone doesn't serve, for whatever reason, where is the respect, the homage to those who do serve? Where is the Hakarat HaTov, the bowing low before those who risk their lives to protect you and your family? Where is the compassion for the mothers who don't get to see their husbands every day for breakfast and dinner, who don't get to see them for months and months at a time? Where are the vocal expressions of gratitude to a government that dishes out billions of shekels to those who stay home all year and face no danger, no discomfort, rather than threatening that same government that they will wreak havoc on you if you dare make any demands whatsoever on them in the future? The chutzpah of looking down at a fellow Jew as if these hardworking, army-serving Jews are just the lowly worker bees, while the great Talmidei Chachamim are the queen bees, the nobles of the nest. And yes, there are plenty of negative actions and reactions from the other side of the fence. It absolutely is true. A lot of harmful, hurtful things being said that should never come out of their mouths. But truthfully, I must say, I expect more, much more, from those who are filled with Torah knowledge. They should be the ones to show the way. But if Torah learning is not partnered with Torah loving, if Chumash does not go in hand with Chesed, then the learning, frankly, is worthless. We are hitting hard times. People, you read the papers, you know what's going on. Suddenly, after the burst of joy that we enjoyed at Shmettering Iran, we are now being bombarded with one former ally of ours after another, insanely insisting that we promote the Palestinians to a state of their own. The whole world, and I mean the whole world, is turned against us. As I wrote in an article, tomorrow's Jerusalem Post, in some ways it is worse than the Shoah, because it's open season on Jews everywhere, not just in places where the Nazis occupied, but everywhere we go. It's open season. There's, by their intent, no safe quarters to run to. And who knows how long our one mighty friend, the USA, will continue to have our back. The latest polls show that I think only 27% of those who vote Democrat support Israel. They're not going to stay out of power indefinitely. It's a cycle, and one party follows another. The Black Fast is upon us, Tisha B'Av, and there's no sugarcoating what is going on here. As we will read in our keynote about all the different horrors we experienced during the destructions of the Bet HaMikdash and beyond, it won't be hard to imagine our enemies of today gleefully perpetrating the same atrocities that the Babylonians and the Romans and all of their ilk perpetrated against us in the past. I don't have any magical solutions. I think all of the words of the rabbis are correct. There is a lot of room for improvement in a lot of places. I chose 3 specific areas where I think we have to work the hardest about understanding what we're doing and not acting without thought, about going beyond the letter of the law, of being lifnim mishurat hadin, and perhaps most of all is to look up, or at least directly at others and not down on them. I don't have any magical solutions. I'm not sure anybody does. I just know one thing. The antidote for overcoming all these dangers starts not by hating them in return, but rather by loving each and every one of us. And if we turn our attention to that somehow, some way, Hashem will turn his attention on us. And I'm confident that he who controls history will turn it in the right direction. Fein yehi ratzon shenishma b'sorot tovot, and we somehow come out of this better than we were before. For our soldiers, Mishaberach Avotenu Avraham Yitzchak B'Yaakov, hu yivarech et chaylei tzva Haganah Yisrael, העומדים על משמר ארצנו ואלוהינו, מגבול הלבנון ועד בימר מצרים, מן הים הגדול עד לבוא הערבה, v'yabasha ba'avir v'bayam. Yitein Adonai toiveinu hakamim aleinu nigafim lifneihem HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Yishmor v'yatzil echayeleinu mikol tzara v'tzuka mikol nego machala. V'yishlach bracha v'atzlacha b'chol ma'aseh yedeihem. Yadbir soneinu taktihem v'yatreim v'chet Yeshua u'bater nitzachon. V'kuya b'hem HaKatuv ki Adonai Elohechem ha'olechim lachem lilachem lachem imoy bechem lo she'erchem v'nomar amen. Everyone should have a Shabbat Shalom. We should have a good and meaningful Tzom on Sunday. V'nishma shenishma rak v'sorot tovot. Thank you for tuning in. Hopefully next week, same time, same place. Everybody stay safe, stay well, and we shall meet only on good occasions.